Lee Changjae had been caught in a devastating road accident. He had been struck by a speeding vehicle and left sprawled on the wet road, his body drenched in blood, while his motorcycle lay in ruins some distance away. In that semi-conscious state, he had begun to reflect on how fleeting and meaningless life truly was. Thoughts swirled in his fading mind. Death could arrive in an instant, without warning and without reason. His blurry vision caught sight of a car nearby, presumably the one responsible for the accident. A woman had been standing next to it, but instead of reaching for her phone to call emergency services, she had simply stood there, her expression blank and detached. He had found himself wondering why she wasn't dialing for help. At that moment, it seemed like the most logical and humane thing to do. To his shock and disbelief, she had quietly stepped back into her vehicle and driven away, leaving him bleeding and helpless on the road. Rather than feeling angry, he had sunk deeper into a sense of futility. There had been no rage left in him, only a cold acceptance of how cruel and indifferent life could be. Born into poverty, he had struggled tirelessly to create a better future for himself, only to end up abandoned in the middle of the road with no one to care. The following morning, a poster had been placed near the site of the accident. It had been from the police, seeking any witnesses to a hit-and-run incident with a contact number provided. Even the gesture had felt hollow to him. He had questioned whether anyone would ever come forward for someone like him, someone without status or recognition. He had recalled hearing somewhere that every human life carried some divine purpose. He had wondered then, if a God truly existed, what purpose had that God intended for him? In the haze of near-death, something unimaginable had occurred. A glowing screen had suddenly appeared before his eyes. It had radiated a celestial light unlike anything of this world. On it, a message had been displayed: "Your discontent has been noted. As a reward, you have been granted a fresh start. Please tell us your desired life." Still barely conscious, he had stared at the screen in confusion. The divine glow of the display had given him the impression that it had descended from the heavens. The question had repeated itself again, prompting him to state what life he desired. He had wondered aloud if this meant he had been resurrected. The screen had confirmed that he had indeed been revived and that he simply needed to choose the new life he wanted. It had all felt surreal to him, like a story out of a fantasy novel. As he continued to process the situation, the screen had again responded, this time telling him that a set of skills would be granted to him based on the reward he selected. Admitting to himself that he had never had the luxury to think about what he truly wanted, he had confessed that he wasn't sure what kind of life to choose. Life had always been about survival for him. The screen had then offered to make the choice on his behalf if he could not decide. After a pause, he had agreed, realizing that having been given a second chance, he had nothing left to lose. However, he had added one condition: he had wanted a life that was exciting, filled with wealth and surrounded by women. The screen had acknowledged his request and presented him with a preview. A question had appeared: would you like to be a father? A cult leader? The options had struck him as strange, even amusing. It had felt oddly satisfying to be offered a choice for once in his life. The term cult had made him hesitate, yet two women had suddenly appeared before him, addressing him as father. The screen had asked again whether he wished to proceed with this life or select a different one. He had silently concluded that the offer suited him perfectly. He had decided to accept. Becoming a cult leader had seemed bizarre, but also exhilarating. Later, he had found himself in the staff room of the restaurant where he worked, sitting across from his manager. The man had been yelling at him furiously, demanding to know why Changjae had canceled the deliveries and destroyed the motorcycle. He had accused him of being irresponsible and had questioned what he planned to do with his life. Changjae had responded in a calm tone, telling him that he was done working at the restaurant, that he had been resurrected and that nothing tied him to the job anymore. The manager had shouted back, asking if he thought he could simply run away from his responsibilities. Changjae nodded and assured him that he had no need for the job anymore. The manager, growing increasingly irritated, had demanded that he pay for the damage to the motorcycle. Changjae, on the other hand, had been distracted by another message appearing on the glowing screen: Cult Leadership Command. You can control someone for 10 minutes. Use a deep, commanding voice. Emotions, however, cannot be controlled. He had found the skill to be oddly specific. He had questioned whether it would truly work. As the manager had continued threatening to call the police, Changjae had contemplated testing the command. Despite his doubts, he had decided to try. He had told the manager that he had no intention of paying for anything but instead expected a severance payment, 10,000 won to be precise. In response, the manager had unexpectedly received a transaction notification on his phone: exactly 10,000 won transferred. The confused manager had asked if the amount was acceptable and Changjae had affirmed that it was. At that point, it had become undeniably clear to him: the power was real. There could be no other explanation. To test it further, he had called the manager again. When the manager had irritably asked what he wanted now, Changjae had told him that he needed a beating. The manager, expressionless, had simply said that he would stand still. Changjae had gone further, instructing the man to smash his own head against Changji's fist. The manager had obeyed, even asking how many times he should do it. Later that evening, under the hot spray of a shower at home, Changjae had quietly reflected on the surreal turn his life had taken. The manager had begged him to stop and handed over the cash, just as commanded. There had been no room left for doubt. His powers were real. For the first time in his life, Lee Changjae had felt what it meant to be in control. As he lay on his bed, his eyes were fixed on the strange screen before him. He found himself murmuring aloud, asking if he could refer to it as a status window. The words on the screen responded immediately, stating that he could call it whatever he wished. While continuing to gaze at the window, he asked another question, wondering whether he possessed any other powers. In response, the screen informed him that he could acquire additional skills as he leveled up. Intrigued, he followed up with another question, trying to confirm if there were indeed more levels to reach. The status window explained that the more frequently he used his existing skills, the higher his level would eventually become. He mused aloud, contemplating the implication that he would have to use his skills often. He mentioned his desire to obtain more powers and began wondering who he could possibly use them on. Just as he remained lying on the bed, lost in thought, the quiet was interrupted by persistent knocking on the door. A voice from outside called out, asking him to open the door, asserting that the person knew he was inside. He wondered silently who could be visiting him at such a late hour. When he opened the door, a girl stood there, demanding to know where her rent was. She insisted he pay it on time so she wouldn't have to come knocking again. This girl was Park Minju. He responded apologetically, claiming he had forgotten about it. Minju didn't hesitate and told him to pay her right away or transfer the amount to her account. It was then explained that Minju was the daughter of the building's owner. She essentially managed the place while her mother was abroad. She added, with a firm tone, that because of his repeated delays, she would now increase his rent by 51. Inwardly, he couldn't help but think how easy life must be for someone like her born into wealth and privilege. When he failed to respond, she grew impatient and questioned why he wasn't answering. As he looked at her, he couldn't help but notice that she appeared like a good potential partner. He admitted that he would still pay her the rent and apologized once more for the delay. Then, out of nowhere, he casually asked if she was going out that evening. Minju, appearing slightly taken aback, remarked that he looked rather nice today. Confused, he asked her what she meant, but her mood quickly shifted as she scolded him, telling him to stop annoying her and dragging things out. She demanded that he just pay her already. She continued by saying she didn't want to continue the conversation any longer. He was somewhat surprised and asked whether she wasn't being a bit too harsh, even if he had been late. But she dismissed him completely, stating she didn't care and was only there because she was dressed up to go eat with her boyfriend. She instructed him to stop asking foolish questions and told him bluntly that she knew he didn't have the money. She gave him an ultimatum: either send the money by tomorrow or vacate the premises. Internally, he felt irritation bubbling up. Her harsh words were really beginning to get under his skin. As he stared at her, a mischievous thought crossed his mind: he could use his powers to teach Park Minju a lesson in manners. Feigning calm, he told her he would pay the rent right away but requested that she come inside his house first. Minju looked at him incredulously, asking whether he was joking. She demanded to know why she should go in, suspecting he might be planning something. She made it clear that she had no intention of stepping inside or listening to him. At that moment, the status window suddenly reappeared, declaring that the cult leader command had been activated on Park Minju. Alongside the message, a status bar and a duration timer were displayed. As if compelled, Minju walked into the house. Both of them sat on the sofa. She looked around in confusion, unable to understand what was happening. She wondered silently what she was even doing there, how her body had moved on its own the moment he told her to come in. She couldn't believe he suddenly had enough money to pay rent. She even wondered if he had robbed a bank. This wasn't the same timid and quiet man she had known. His demeanor had changed completely. He handed her a thick bundle of cash, telling her it covered the rent for both the current month and the next. She stared at the money in astonishment, thanking him politely while thinking to herself that she needed to leave the place as quickly as possible. But just as she was about to leave, he grabbed her wrist. He told her that before he gave her the money, he wanted something in return. Shocked, she asked him what he meant by that, begging him to let go, telling him that her hand hurt. She said she couldn't believe what he was saying. He brought up her earlier words that she didn't want to speak to him and had said so many harsh things. He questioned why someone like her wouldn't think a man like him could bring her into his home. Alarmed, she asked him if he was insane and repeated her question, what did he mean by something in return? With a cold and casual tone, he told her it was simple. She was a grown woman and should understand what he was implying. He even offered her an excuse, suggesting that if she left, she could tell herself she only did it for the money. He said he wouldn't pay her if she walked out, giving her the option to rationalize it however she pleased. Minju, increasingly disturbed, told him that what he was saying was wrong and strange. Yet, even as her thoughts raced, she realized with growing dread that her body was no longer under her control, it was moving entirely on its own. She told him firmly that he couldn't go back on his words later. He responded with a nod, saying that if he was satisfied with the upcoming workout session, he would let her go home, and from now on, she should act as his partner. She questioned aloud how she had even ended up in such a situation, unable to comprehend how things had come to this. As he looked at her, his thoughts wandered. He wondered what his first encounter with Park Minju had been like and soon found himself slipping into a vivid memory. Back then, he had been standing on the rooftop terrace, quietly smoking, when Minju passed by him. She had been dressed elegantly as if she was heading somewhere important. Upon spotting him, she had stopped and asked in a slightly condescending tone if he was a delivery man, questioning why he was smoking there. He had told her that he had just moved into the rooftop room and now lived there. She replied casually that the broker had mentioned a new tenant moving in and then asked his age. When he said he was 24, she remarked that they were the same age and informed him that she was the daughter of the building's owner, implying she had authority over the place. He had offered a handshake with a friendly tone, saying he would be in her care from now on. However, she had pulled her hand back harshly, clearly unimpressed. He had been taken aback by her cold reaction. She had warned him not to hang around the stairwell late at night and not to smoke, stating bluntly that if he didn't follow the rules, he'd be kicked out. With those final words, she had walked downstairs, calling him a careless tenant as she left. He had stood there, still processing the encounter, wondering what kind of person she was. Then, from the rooftop, he noticed Minju standing below with another boy, likely her boyfriend. That had been the very first time he had met Park Minju. Changjae remembered how flustered he had felt back then, his emotions tangled in confusion. Down below, Minju's boyfriend had asked her if she knew the delivery guy. She had responded dismissively, telling him not to worry and that it seemed the man had just moved in. That brief moment of flustered interest had quickly shifted into envy. Minju had turned to her boyfriend and asked if he had gotten a new car. The boyfriend had laughed, explaining that the car wasn't his yet, it belonged to his father. Changjae had felt a pang of jealousy. Being born rich seemed like a luxury out of his reach. Minju had gone on to ask about the cost of the car and mentioned wanting one for herself. Her boyfriend had said it cost around 6 million won. She had laughed and said she might ask her mother to buy it for her. Changjae could tell she was someone who had always been spoiled and never reprimanded, her life drenched in comfort and attention. He had overheard her asking her boyfriend where they were headed, to which the boyfriend replied with a chuckle that they were going to a place where the wind touched gently. Watching her from behind, Changjae had thought bitterly that she belonged to an entirely different world, a world of comfort and luxury, while he remained shackled by poverty and struggle. He had seen her hand over a card to her boyfriend, insisting that she wouldn't ride for free and telling him to use the card for gas. The boyfriend accepted it casually. At that moment, Changjae had felt convinced that a girl like her would never associate with someone like him, a mere delivery worker. Snapping back to the present, Minju was now sitting in his room, both of them preparing for a yoga session. She asked him what he was doing, questioning whether he intended for her to stay there all night. She reluctantly agreed, though, seeming eager to finish the session quickly and leave. He looked at her, noticing how she sat at his feet, and thought to himself that he should make the session quick. She, too, was thinking that if she could just get through the yoga exercises quickly, she could leave right after. After the session, he commented that she was better than he had expected. Observing her expression, he noted silently that she still looked quite irritated. It seemed she still clung to her pride, perhaps because it had been a long time since anyone had challenged her. She asked curtly whether the session was done and if she could leave. At that moment, the status window displayed the remaining time of the command's effect. As she handed him all the money and turned to leave, he noticed there was still some time left. She, on the other hand, was confused, questioning herself silently about why she was still lingering in his room. He looked at the screen and asked what would happen once the cult leader command duration ended. The screen responded that when the time expired, the target would act according to his desires. He thought to himself that it meant he could do anything he wanted within that window. Even if he ordered her to continue the yoga session, she would only stop 3 minutes later. The time was limited, but he considered the opportunity. She interrupted his thoughts, asking again what he was doing. He responded casually that he was running an experiment. In his mind, he resolved to push her further. He wanted to make her as enthusiastic about the workout session as he was. He began teaching her more advanced exercise techniques, and soon the status window indicated that the cult leader command had been reactivated, displaying a new duration timer. However, as they continued, she started feeling uneasy and questioned whether they should stop the exercise. She was beginning to sense something strange. Her thoughts became more anxious. If they kept going like this, she felt she'd become too exhausted. Just then, the status window showed that the time limit had ended. The cult leader command no longer worked on Park Minju, it had expired. After the workout ended, he looked at her and remarked that her reaction had been better than he had anticipated, noting that she seemed like she had been starving for this kind of attention or challenge. She, meanwhile, found it all very strange. Her mind felt blank and she couldn't summon the strength to move her body properly. He asked her whether she had any complaints about what had happened. But her thoughts were growing heavier. She felt the need to stop him from continuing with any further sessions. If it went on like this, she felt she might die from sheer exhaustion. She finally called out his name. He turned toward her and acknowledged her with a calm, yes. Park Minju, watching her expression closely. Changjae suggested they begin the workout session again, thinking it was time to resume. However, Minju interrupted his intention by stating that she needed to take a shower first, explaining that she was sweating too much. As she walked toward the bathroom, Changjae remained seated outside, quietly observing the status window in front of him. His mind wandered as he processed the situation, realizing that he had expected her to refuse outright and flee, yet here she was willingly heading into the shower. This unexpected turn of events didn't seem like a bad deal for him at all. While he waited, the status window presented a new message, informing him that he had completed the quest. It declared that the cult leader command had been used 2 times and congratulated him, announcing that a new reward had been unlocked, believer management. The system explained that Park Minju had been successfully registered as his believer and that he now had the ability to manage her as a follower. It elaborated that he could raise her loyalty and faith, emphasizing that the higher her faith was, the more likely she would be to obey his commands. Changjae paused to consider the concept of faith and asked mentally what exactly it entailed. The status window responded that faith could be increased when the believer experienced happiness because of him. As he processed the idea, a detailed profile of Park Minju appeared, labeling her as a believer filled with doubt. The entry explained that she was the type who would pretend to follow commands only when she was frightened or had no better option. This clarified the reason why she had gone into the bathroom so suddenly, and it became evident to him that her obedience was not entirely sincere. He found the concept intriguing and wondered if having a high enough level of faith meant he wouldn't need to rely on issuing commands at all. The system confirmed this thought and pointed out that his way of thinking was quite blunt. Another notification appeared, indicating that due to Park Minju's fluctuating faith, he could now listen to her internal thoughts. According to the system, she was trying to run away and actively seeking a method of escape. Changjae silently challenged that conclusion, thinking that if she still wanted to flee, it meant she wasn't truly willing to be his workout partner. The window presented a new goal. He was now required to increase her happiness to a certain threshold within a specific time frame. A reward would be granted upon success. He contemplated whether he should actively work on raising her faith in him. Inside the restroom, Park Minju was struggling with the small window, trying to open it. She grumbled to herself, annoyed at how narrow it was, and attempted to squeeze through in hopes of escaping. At that moment, Changjae suddenly appeared behind her and calmly commented that the window was indeed too small for her to escape through. She turned around, visibly shocked and panicked, and hastily claimed she hadn't been trying to run away. She added that she usually took long showers up to 3 hours at times. Changjae agreed with a light tone and explained that he had thought as much, which was why he had come to assist her. He reminded her that now that she had finished showering, they could resume the exercise session. The status window updated again, revealing that Park Minju's excitement was beginning to rise once more. They started exercising again. As they moved through the motions, Minja's mind felt clouded and disoriented. She couldn't make sense of her actions, questioning why she was doing all of this with a boy like him. Her thoughts drifted to the past, recalling her time in university when friends and upperclassmen would invite her to hang out. Whenever they asked her if she was free or wanted to join them, she always replied coldly that she had no interest in playing around. Changjae had already known she was far from easy. When male classmates tried to approach her, she would tell them bluntly to get lost. She was highly popular among her peers, both in school and at university. During group projects, she would sometimes disappear without responding, and when her sunbaes confronted her, she would apologize vaguely, explaining that she had gone off-grid. Her seniors would usually forgive her, brushing it off by saying the grades were already bad anyway, and would even joke about getting others to complete her part for the sake of preserving her marks. Back in the present, Minju found herself overwhelmed. She questioned why someone like her, who had never heard a single harsh word from others, now stood in such a humiliating position. Chang-jae, having concluded the workout session, informed her that everything was over and she was now all clear. His mind, however, was beginning to spiral. He noticed the scent of her hair and the subtle fragrance of her soap. He couldn't help but wonder where the haughty, arrogant expression from earlier had gone. He asked her if she had enjoyed the session too much. She denied it firmly, insisting that she hadn't felt anything and hadn't enjoyed it at all. The status window displayed new information, revealing that Park Minju was lying. He found her denial amusing and accused her of being shameless, laughing at her hesitation. She grew flustered and asked nervously what he planned to do next. He reminded her that she had just said she hadn't felt anything, as if repeating her own excuse back to her. The status window flickered again, indicating that Park Minju's excitement was continuing to increase during the workout session. Chang-jae observed Minju's reactions closely. He asked her how she was feeling and whether even this exercise routine failed to stir anything within her. Despite the growing tension in the room, Minju maintained a steady expression and insisted once again that she didn't feel anything. Her voice lacked conviction, but she clung to the denial as if it were a shield. Chang-jae, however, was unconvinced. Internally, he noted how transparently she lied. Her eyes, her body language, even the slight quiver in her voice made it obvious. He found her denial frustrating yet fascinating. Minju tried to explain that she wasn't someone who enjoyed physical exercise, that it simply wasn't part of who she was. At that moment, the status window blinked again, informing him that Minju's excitement had increased and that she was currently engulfed in confusion. Chang-jae leaned back slightly and processed that update. If she was truly confused, then that state of disarray might be something he could use to his advantage. His gaze lingered on her for a moment longer as he mentally noted that she looked genuinely conflicted, like someone at war with herself. The status window responded again, this time with a command option. It indicated that, by deepening his voice and using a firm tone, he could activate a temporary 10-minute control over her, though he would not be able to manipulate her emotions directly. The profile window for Park Minju appeared once again, clearly listing her as a believer, but one whose thoughts were still erratic and reactive. She tried to refute everything he said, still desperately clinging to the narrative that she didn't want any of this. Successfully completed. The time limit and difficulty level were displayed, along with the reward details. Park Minju's faith had increased, and she was now officially recognized as a regular believer, someone who would try to follow commands even without the use of external pressure. Upon reading this, Chang-jae's face lit up with excitement. He realized that he had succeeded in changing something fundamental within her. As they wrapped up the session, he told her that it was over and she could get down now. He assured her that he would send her home. But as he looked at her more closely, he noticed that her eyes had shut and her body had gone limp. She had fainted, her body clearly unable to handle the physical and emotional strain. Later that night, while she was sleeping beside him on the floor, she began murmuring in her sleep. Chang-jae glanced at her, surprised. It felt strange to see someone like her, usually proud, composed, and cold, reduced to a vulnerable, childlike state. Her voice was soft and mumbled as she called out for her mother and complained that she was hungry. Suddenly, the status window appeared once again, flashing a congratulatory message. Curious, he asked internally what the congratulations were for. The system replied that he had earned bonus experience. When he questioned what that meant, the window explained that his level had increased to 2 and that he had received additional experience for completing a quest related to a believer. His available daily commands had increased to 2 and his maximum follower faith had risen slightly as well. In addition, a new skill had been unlocked. Chang-jae's excitement grew further as he read the notification. He had finally done it. The new skill was titled Cult Leader's Sly Gaslighting, and it allowed him to subtly influence and manipulate a believer's mental state using belief points. The current statistics of Park Minju's faith level were displayed, allowing him to see how far she had progressed and where her resistance still remained. As he continued reading, he couldn't help but marvel at how detailed the system was. The mechanics behind control and influence were far more elaborate than he initially assumed. With mild sarcasm, he wondered who had even come up with such a ridiculous skill name. The status window responded with cold indifference, stating that unnecessary questions would be disregarded. He thought to himself that the system might be insane, but the name wasn't the real issue. What mattered was that everything now revolved around cultivating and managing believers. With more believers came more power, more experience, and deeper influence. The status window reminded him again that increasing a believer's loyalty and faith would lead to greater obedience. He would also gain additional experience by keeping his followers happy. All these new benefits painted a clear picture. His path forward now depended entirely on managing his believers wisely. Beside him, Minju continued sleeping, still murmuring dreamily. She asked her mother not to give her more sausages and mentioned that her jaw hurt. He looked down at her fragile form and thought to himself that ultimately the role of a cult leader involved one essential responsibility: gathering more followers. The question now echoed in his mind: who should he turn into a believer next? Several days later, in Darim, Chinatown, a girl approached a group of rough-looking men who seemed to operate outside the boundaries of the law. With nervous urgency, she asked them for help. One of the men listened to her explanation and repeated her story to confirm she had hit someone with her car, but it hadn't been reported and no one had gone to the hospital. Now, she was afraid that the person involved might retaliate. She wanted them to shut that person up to handle the problem discreetly. When asked if that was truly what she wanted, the girl nodded and pleaded with them to find the person she hated most. Two men who were operating illegally as investigators walked into the delivery office reception and began questioning the receptionist. One of them demanded to know if anyone there had recently been involved in an accident during delivery, insisting that since it was a delivery office, she should be aware of such incidents. The receptionist, clearly frightened, replied that no such cases had occurred recently. The man pressed her further, questioning how he could be sure she was telling the truth. She explained that their system kept track of everyone, so if someone had been in an accident, they would know. However, she added hesitantly that they didn't seem like real police officers. The man insisted once more that they were indeed the police, expressing frustration that she didn't believe him. Then, the second man stepped forward and demanded more firmly that she answer their questions. Later, the two men were eating outside. One of them asked his companion how he could be so certain about something. The first man sarcastically replied that if he had known, he wouldn't be acting so foolishly. The second man proposed that they could simply claim they had found the target and collect the money. The first man shut him down, emphasizing that they couldn't make such a claim unless they had actually located the person. The second man, now confused, asked what exactly he meant by showing off. The first man explained that the client's body was stunning and that she was incredibly attractive. The second man agreed, commenting that she appeared to be quite wealthy as well. The first man then added that they should think ahead, suggesting that if they played their cards right, they could end up with both the money and the woman as a partner. He proposed that they check out places other than delivery offices since, so far, they hadn't found the target, implying that he was no ordinary man but someone meticulous and hard to trace. Meanwhile, Chungjae was at home, staring at his status window. The message displayed read, "I did not do it." He questioned the status window, asking if it had truly not cursed him. The window reassured him that it hadn't. He then wondered aloud why his ears were itchy and noted that even his dream had been irritating. Changing the subject, he asked the status window how he could gather more believers, inquiring about the fastest method to convert someone. The status window replied that the quickest way was to let others experience his divine power, force them to submit, to obey orders they normally wouldn't. It mentioned that while begging or persuading people was possible, it wasn't advisable. Chungjae commented that the method sounded vague but also somewhat easy, concluding that training or yoga sessions would be the most effective. He then asked whom he should target next to gain more believers. At that moment, he received a call from the manager of his former part-time job at Minjas. The manager greeted him and informed him that someone was there looking for him. Promptly, Chungjae went to Minjas. The manager welcomed him and invited him to sit down, noting that he was glad Chungjae could make it. However, Chungjae had a strange feeling that something was off. The manager served him a cola and Chungjae asked who had been asking for him. The manager replied that the person had been waiting there the whole time but had just stepped out for a moment. Pressing further, Chungjae asked why that person was looking for him. The manager began to explain but was interrupted as a woman approached from behind and introduced herself as Song Min-young. She stated that she had something to ask Chungjae. He asked if she was from the auditing team. Quietly, the manager leaned toward him and whispered that the severance pay he had given might have become a problem, asking if this was about the $10,000. Min-young suggested they changed their seating arrangement, and once all three of them were settled again, she took the lead in questioning. She declared that she wanted to know the details, why the manager had given such a large amount of money and why Chungjae had accepted it, starting with the manager. The manager, confused and hesitant, tried to recall the reason, stating that he believed he had a valid explanation. At that moment, the status window appeared before Chungjae, informing him that anyone affected by the cult leader's command would have their memories erased. He realized that the manager likely wouldn't be able to explain anything. The manager then blurted out that Chung Jae had broken a motorbike. Min Young pointed out that in such a case, the manager should have received compensation, not the other way around. The manager appeared distressed, insisting that he couldn't overlook such an accusation. Meanwhile, Chung Jae realized that he was in trouble. Min Young turned to him and demanded an explanation. Chung Jae, maintaining his composure, claimed he couldn't remember either. She warned them that if the matter wasn't resolved soon, she would be forced to report both of them to the authorities. She asked if the manager had ever been interrogated by a public prosecutor, revealing that she had, and it had been a rough experience. The manager, still puzzled, insisted that he genuinely couldn't remember anything about it. Min Young scoffed, saying that was the same excuse everyone used. She didn't understand why people always resorted to such obvious lies, then let out a laugh. Turning to the manager, Chung Jae asked whether she wasn't just a regular employee, suggesting she had probably done this many times before. He considered using the cult leader's command on her but hesitated, realizing that if he couldn't handle the aftermath, he'd end up in the same mess again. Min Young then brought up his background, pointing out that she had done some research on him and discovered that his emergency contact was an orphanage. She assured him not to be upset as she had encountered similar situations many times. Chung Jae felt that she had crossed a line. She commented on how difficult it must have been for him to survive on his own, earning money without support. She claimed she pitied him and saw him like a younger brother. She then asked for the return of the $10,000, promising to drop everything if he complied. Chung Jae told the manager that they had no other option and that he would take responsibility. Min Young praised his decision, calling it wise, and asked how he planned to return the money, suggesting he transfer it to the company account immediately. To her surprise, Chung Jae raised his voice and asked who had said he was giving her the money. He grabbed her wrist as she protested, telling him to let go because he was hurting her. He dragged her out of the restaurant while she demanded to know what he was doing. She reminded him that he had just said he would take responsibility and asked what he planned to do now. He calmly responded that Min Young had crossed a line and that he was going to teach her a lesson. She panicked, yelling at him to clarify what kind of lesson he meant. He told her she had no idea how terrifying or fun things could become. He opened a door and led her inside. Once inside, he ordered her to get to work, assuring her it would be over soon. She continued to ask what he intended to do and whether he was really that upset just because she had called him an orphan. He finally declared that her punishment would be to participate in a yoga session with him. At that moment, the status window displayed that a new believer had been created, along with the difficulty level and the reward. In a dimly lit room, Chung Jae had blinded and tied up Min Young. She kept struggling and calling out, demanding to know what was happening. Her voice carried a mixture of frustration and disbelief as she shouted that men like him were all the same and told him to hurry up and untie her. Despite her pleas, Chung Jae remained silent, offering no response. Min Young grew anxious and called out again, asking whether he was still there, insisting that he hadn't left and questioning what he even wanted from her. In his thoughts, Chung Jae observed that she seemed to be exhausting herself. He reminded himself that she had already guessed his intentions earlier, that he wanted her to become his partner during the exercise sessions. He admitted silently that he had expected this reaction but still felt uncertain. Min Young, sensing the situation wasn't going her way, retorted that once she got out of there, she would have him arrested and sent straight to prison. Chung Jae noted mentally that she wasn't an ordinary woman. Even in a scenario where fear should have overtaken her, she continued to fight back, or perhaps it was all just an act. She commented that since he had expected this confrontation, things might progress more smoothly now. At that moment, Chung Jae removed the eye cover and stated calmly that, regardless of the direction things would take, it was unfolding exactly as he had intended. He then suggested that they make a bet. Min Young looked at him warily and asked what kind of bet he meant. He explained that if she could resist him, then she would win. If she did, she could do whatever she liked, report him, have him arrested, or even kill him. He also promised to return the $10,000 if she succeeded. He asked her how that sounded. She stared at him in disbelief, questioning what kind of twisted bet this was, and pointed out that he was clearly a criminal. He told her to just go ahead with it. At that moment, the status window appeared, stating that the cult leader command had been activated. He addressed her, accusing her of provoking a so-called criminal with reckless words. He warned that if he decided to subject her to a harsher training session during the workout, she might regret it. He continued by saying that she didn't want to lose the money and become a laughingstock back at the office. He claimed he was giving her a chance, one last opportunity to choose. Min Young, sensing the pressure, asked for confirmation, wanting to know if he was being truthful and not playing with her. She hesitated but eventually agreed, telling him that he had to keep his promise. Though she recognized that the entire thing was clearly a trap, she still found herself accepting the offer from this twisted man who wanted her as his workout partner. With a deep breath, she agreed to the bet. The status window then confirmed that Song Min-young was overwhelmed with emotion and unable to comprehend why the quest had been marked as complete. It also indicated that a new believer had been created, displaying the difficulty level and the reward associated with it. Chang-jae thought to himself that she was truly exceptional. In a situation where most people would freeze in terror, she had shown no visible fear. He noted that 10 minutes were nearly up but wondered aloud what she was planning now in regard to timing. Min-young smirked and suggested that calling the police now would be perfect timing. She wondered whether anyone would even come visit him once he was in prison. Chang-jae, noting her continued resistance, concluded that perhaps he had been too lenient with her. The status window displayed a new objective: raise the believer's loyalty. It explained that the stronger the believer's faith, the more obedient they would become to his commands. It asked whether he wished to use 10 of his points to increase the intensity of the workout session. Without hesitation, Chang-jae agreed. Min-young mocked him again, saying that if he didn't think he could win, he might as well just get it over with. The status window then updated, stating that Song Min-young's exercise session power had been increased. As the session went on, Chang-jae asked her how it was going. He remarked that her expression seemed to contradict everything she had said earlier. He pressed her, asking if her current state was her answer. Min-young admitted reluctantly that this was completely different from before. Her body felt like it was burning up and she insisted she couldn't endure another round of the so-called exercise session. Meanwhile, outside the staff room, the manager stood waiting. When Chang-jae finally emerged, the manager questioned him about what was happening inside. Chang-jae reassured him calmly that everything had been taken care of, just as he had previously promised. The manager looked confused and asked what he meant. Chang-jae simply told him not to worry and that he would be leaving now. As he walked away, he paused and advised the manager not to ask any more questions and to assist Min-young later. On his way home, Chang-jae reflected on everything that had transpired. He had completed the quest and resolved the issue regarding the severance pay, which was satisfying. Yet, deep down, he admitted to himself that he wanted more. The status window, always perceptive, asked what exactly he meant by more. Chang-jae responded that the earlier location had been awkward and he'd been forced to rush due to the time limit. That wasn't how a proper yoga session should be. In his opinion, such sessions required a peaceful environment and enough time to set the mood. The status window encouraged him to find another believer. Annoyed, Chang-jae snapped at it to be quiet for a moment. As he continued walking, he suddenly noticed a group of the investigators who had been hunting him. They approached him, surprised to see him reappear. One of them asked if he had just returned, telling him that they had been searching for him for a long time. They mentioned that they were close to giving up when they spotted someone riding a scooter down a nearby alley. The investigators warned him not to try anything foolish. One of them pointed out that they had brought along plenty of reinforcements. They suggested that it was finally time to have a friendly meeting right there and then. The group of gangsters had begun shouting for someone to come forward, their aggressive tone echoing in the street. From a short distance away, Park Min-ju stood quietly, observing the scene unfold with growing confusion. Her brows furrowed and she remained rooted to the spot, unable to comprehend the chaotic situation. A sense of unease spread through her as she wondered silently what on earth was happening before her eyes. Meanwhile, the investigators, if they were indeed investigators, were approaching Chang-jae, ordering him to come forward and remain calm. Their tone was commanding, but Chang-jae found himself debating inwardly whether to use his cult leader's authority. However, seeing the number of men present, he concluded that there was no real point in doing so. The odds weren't in his favor. One of the men stepped up with a threatening voice, instructing the others to grab Chang-jae and warning him not to make things more difficult than they already were. As Chang-jae assessed the situation, he couldn't help but speculate that these men were far from legitimate law enforcement. They lacked the professionalism or procedure typical of police. Their demeanor suggested they were either gangsters or freelance investigators working under someone else's orders. They must have had a strong reason to come after him, especially if they were also interested in the delivery scooter. It became increasingly clear that they were pursuing the unresolved hit-and-run incident. As one of the men approached him with intent, Chang-jae struck preemptively, punching him hard. This caused a brief stir among the others. Without hesitation, Chang-jae questioned their motives, asking them why they were doing this to him and insisting that they were all essentially on the same side. One of the men mocked his claim, asking what he meant by the same team. Chang-jae elaborated, pointing out that if they were trying to take him somewhere, it was likely because they needed him as a living piece of evidence tied to the hit-and-run. And if the culprit wanted no witnesses, then it meant the ones who stood before him needed him alive for leverage. He speculated aloud whether the person who had hit him had perhaps been someone attractive or possibly wealthy, admitting he hadn't gotten a clear look at their face. The mood darkened as one of the men coldly remarked that he had the power to make Changjae disappear entirely without a trace. But Changjae, undeterred, countered that if that were truly the case, they wouldn't have gone through the trouble of waiting for him. They could have simply torched his apartment while he was gone. Deep down, he hoped his bluff would buy him some time or at least confuse them. One of the men smirked, admitting that Changjae wasn't bad at bluffing and perhaps he was wasting his talents working as a deliverman. He even jokingly added that since both of them made money and issued threats for a living, they might as well be colleagues. However, he quickly returned to business, stating that although they might work together, Changjae shouldn't expect an equal cut. 90% would go to them and he would get the remaining 10%. Changjae replied dryly that he hadn't expected a fair split anyway. The man laughed again, mocking him for having manners despite the circumstances, and declared that he'd let Changjae win this round. After fiddling with his phone, the man claimed to have found Changjae's ID and began walking away with the others. Before leaving, he warned Changjae not to try escaping. Now that they knew where he lived, they expected him to come when called. The man sarcastically addressed him as teammate once more. Changjae, now exhausted, muttered a half-hearted response and watched them disappear. He couldn't shake the feeling that this man would bring endless trouble into his life. Entering his apartment, Changjae felt overwhelmed. The place had been ransacked, furniture overturned, items scattered, drawers open. Clearly, the group had searched it thoroughly while he had been outside. Muttering to himself, he expressed irritation that they couldn't even clean up after themselves. The status window appeared with a comment asking if he planned to clean up the mess. Changjae muttered back that he'd handle it tomorrow, explaining that he simply didn't have the energy to deal with it at the moment. He collapsed onto the bed, reflecting on the uneasy alliance he had formed with the gang leader to temporarily escape the situation. Yet, he remained wary. If that man gained too much control, he might go so far as to sell Changji's organs. Still, considering he had been intending to track down the person responsible for the hit and run anyway, at least now he had someone indirectly connected. The status window reappeared with a new notification. One of his believers now had emotional categories to be managed. Specifically, it stated that Park Minja's guilt toward you had been added. Puzzled, Changjae studied the message and wondered why she was feeling guilty about him right now. The answer came quickly. The window revealed that she regretted giving his personal information to the investigators. A laugh escaped from his lips as he read this. He concluded that Park Minju definitely needed to be taught a lesson. The following day, Park Minju and her boyfriend, Jo Byung-jun, were riding a train together, seated side by side in silence. Byung-jun noticed something was off. Her expression had been strained all day and she hadn't spoken much. He gently asked her what was wrong and if something was bothering her. She brushed it off, claiming she was simply drunk. But he didn't buy it. He pointed out that she hadn't even touched alcohol. He lamented how distant she had become lately, how quiet she remained even when they were together, and how it saddened him to see her so distracted. Without answering directly, Park Minju stood up suddenly, saying she needed to stretch her back. As the train doors slid open, Byung-jun offered to accompany her, but she declined, telling him to rest since he was likely tired. He protested, saying he had wanted to spend the entire day sitting beside her, but she dismissed his concerns and told him to stay put. As she walked away, a troubling thought crept into her mind. Something was definitely wrong with her behavior. Her memories drifted back to the day the investigators had appeared near her building. One of the men had identified a wrecked scooter, noting that it likely belonged to the delivery man involved in the hit and run. Their leader, Hyungnim, agreed, suggesting the man must be hiding nearby. When Park Minju had confronted them, they questioned her identity and why she was there. She had boldly demanded to know why they were loitering suspiciously in front of her building and warned them that she'd call the police if they didn't leave. They had only smirked, accusing her of possibly breaking the law herself and threatening her with jail. Their strange behavior unsettled her. One of them had then stepped forward and revealed that they were police officers. He asked if she knew who the scooter belonged to and warned her that if she didn't cooperate, they might have to bring her in for questioning. The fear had overwhelmed her and she had ended up spilling everything she knew. Coming back to the present, Minju stood quietly in the train carriage, anxiety weighing on her chest. Everything made sense now. Those men hadn't been police at all, they were gangsters. She began to wonder if Changjae himself had once been involved in such activities. The thought made her stomach churn. What if something bad happened to her now? While she stood, caught in her worries, Changjae suddenly appeared beside her. Byung-jun remained asleep on the bench. Without warning, Changjae placed a hand gently on her face and warned her to stay silent unless she wanted her boyfriend to notice them. She froze in shock, unable to believe that he was there, and asked in a whisper what he was doing. Changjae responded calmly, implying that she already knew why he had come. Panic began to stir within her as she questioned whether he had found out that she was the one who had given his information to the gangsters. He confirmed her fears by expressing disappointment, saying he hadn't expected her to be that kind of person. He accused her of ruining his night and asked her how she planned to make up for it. The status window notified him again. Her guilt had naturally increased. Minju apologized sincerely, telling him she hadn't known the truth either, that she had been deceived just like him. But her words didn't satisfy him. He told her that no amount of apology could compensate for what had happened. When she asked what he intended to do, he responded without hesitation. Her punishment, he said, would be to carry out a full yoga session right there, directly in front of her sleeping boyfriend. Minju, visibly panicked, pleaded with him to stop. She insisted there were still people around, and if they continued like this, they were bound to get caught. Her voice trembled as she asked how far he planned on going with this. But instead of responding directly, Changjae warned her to keep quiet. He reminded her that her boyfriend, Byung-jun, seemed like a decent guy and she wouldn't want to hurt someone like him unless, of course, she wanted him to wake up and see what was happening. Alarmed, she shook her head quickly, murmuring a desperate no under her breath. He smirked at her helplessness and leaned in closer, his voice low and taunting as he demanded that she show him just how excited she really was. Inside, Minja's thoughts raced. She felt cornered. Her instincts screamed to resist, to run, but her reality was far more complicated. She reasoned to herself that avoiding further humiliation or confrontation with Byung-jun meant going along with Changjae just this once. She wasn't agreeing, she was surviving. When she quietly asked if they could stop, hoping to appeal to some shred of decency in him, he responded coldly, demanding to know who had given her permission. He wasn't letting go of the power he held. She sat frozen, her body tensed with shame and disbelief. The weight of what was happening bore down on her. Her mind reeled with the thought that she should be angry, outraged even, yet somehow the intensity of the situation only amplified her emotions. The proximity of her sleeping boyfriend made the sensations sharper, the confusion deeper. It felt wrong in every possible way, and yet the thrill that came with fear left her emotions tangled in knots. The status window appeared, flashing a simple message: Park Minju's stamina has increased. She noticed it, barely acknowledging the absurdity of how her body was reacting. She whispered to herself that she didn't understand what was happening anymore, that she couldn't continue with things like this. Her thoughts were spiraling. The train slowed as it approached Jungak Station. Minju glanced up and muttered the name of the stop with a disconnected tone. Around them, whispers had begun to spread. Fellow passengers, many of whom had been watching discreetly or catching glimpses of the strange tension between the two, were now talking openly. One person commented about how wild the couple had seemed. Another joked that they must have headed off to a motel to finish their strange workout. A third passenger, with clear amusement, said he wished he had filmed it. Some added that the girl had been particularly beautiful, almost too beautiful for such a scene. After the train came to a halt and the passengers filed out, Changjae turned to Minju with an expectant expression. With the crowd now gone, he remarked that it was time for him to receive the rest of her apology. He wasn't finished yet. He demanded she continue the workout, making it clear that she didn't have the luxury to refuse. In his thoughts, he couldn't believe what a rare opportunity this was, a girlfriend submitting herself right in front of her sleeping boyfriend. He wasn't going to let it slip away. He told her he'd end the session soon, but only if she requested it herself out loud. Minju hesitated, her pride crushed, her conscience in turmoil. But if asking meant it would end faster, she forced herself to comply. Every word felt like betrayal, not just of herself, but of the one person who trusted her most. Changjae then pressed her again, telling her to be completely honest. No more evasions, no more diluted truths. He wanted to know how it truly felt for her. When she whispered that it was the best workout she's ever had, he pushed even further. He asked how it was compared to her boyfriend. The answer came slowly, painfully. She admitted that Changjae trained her better than Byung-jun did. The status window flickered to life again, displaying a warning. Park Minja's mental state is starting to collapse, unstoppable effect triggered. Experience gain is doubled. It was as if her confusion and loss of control were being quantified by the very system governing her reality. She stared at it, unable to respond. Despite it all, she whispered again, asking for the exercise to continue. Her own voice startled her, pleading, vulnerable and foreign. The status window updated once more. Believer Park Minju's experience has increased. Cult leader level up. New skill acquired. Changjae glanced at the notification and smirked to himself, wondering if this was what happened whenever a believer's mind broke. It seemed almost too easy. Her downfall had come with rewards. Minju looked toward her boyfriend, her voice faltering as she urged that they stop before he woke up. But Changjae replied without concern. He said it didn't matter, that Byung-jun wouldn't be waking up anytime soon. Staring directly at the sleeping man, he added calmly that he had already dealt with him. Byung-jun had been put to sleep a long time ago. Minja's breath caught in her throat. She could barely bring herself to speak, stammering that her boyfriend might still wake up. But deep down, she knew that possibility was slim. Her heart ached as she looked at him. Her thoughts grew heavy with guilt and shame. She silently admitted to herself that after all this, she might never be able to go back to him again. The train had just come to a halt at Sangbong Station. A calm, automated announcement filled the air, notifying the passengers that they had arrived at Sangbong and that the exit doors would be opening on their right. It also advised that anyone heading toward Yangwon Station should remain alert and prepare for departure. Startled by the announcement, Byung-jun suddenly opened his eyes. His heart pounded as he looked around and realized the train car was almost empty. Confusion quickly turned into concern as he noticed that Park Minju, his girlfriend, was nowhere in sight. A strange feeling settled in his chest. Something didn't feel right. She hadn't said anything before disappearing, and the fact that she would just leave without a word made him uneasy. Her behavior had grown increasingly odd in recent days, and he couldn't help but feel that something was deeply wrong. There had been a subtle distance between them, a shift in her demeanor that he couldn't explain. Unbeknownst to him, Park Minju was on the other side of the station, engaged in a yoga session with Changjae. Changjae noticed her hesitance and asked in a calm but pointed tone whether she wanted to end the session already. He asked her if she believed she had paid off her debt to him. His words, though gentle in tone, carried a weight that made her chest tighten. He told her that she appeared to be getting more and more excited and then questioned whether that was really the demeanor of someone seeking punishment. She shook her head quickly and denied it, saying that if they got caught doing something like this here, she wouldn't be able to endure the shame. But Changjae only pressed her further, asking if she was more worried about getting caught than she was about her own boyfriend. Her voice cracked slightly as she said it wasn't about that, it wasn't about anyone. She insisted that it didn't matter anymore. He reassured her, confidently saying that there was no chance of them getting caught. But Minju remained anxious. She pointed out that they were doing yoga in the middle of a subway station and emphasized how exposed they were. She kept glancing around, unable to shake the feeling that someone might be watching. Her voice grew tense as she stressed that this could not end well. He responded with a grin, asking if she was only thinking of stopping the session because of the fear of getting caught. He studied her face and asked what kind of expression she was wearing now. She looked back at him with uncertainty, quietly saying that someone could be spying on them even at that very moment. To her dismay, he replied that he was aware of that possibility, but that it only heightened his excitement. Just then, the status window suddenly appeared in her view. It displayed new data indicating that Park Minju's workout stamina had increased and that her believer level had risen. It also noted that she had become compliant, unable to deny Changji's requests. Despite her inner turmoil, they continued their yoga session. As the session went on, a stranger passed by nearby, speaking on the phone. He told the person on the other end that he would probably make it in time and not to worry about him being late. Hearing his voice, Minju's anxiety flared up again. She pleaded with Changjae to stop the session now, insisting that people were arriving and the situation could quickly turn dangerous. She glanced around nervously and noticed another passenger sitting nearby. A deep sense of dread filled her chest. What if that person had been silently observing them all this time? Lee Changjae reminded Park Minju that he had already told her they wouldn't get caught. He assured her that he had known the situation would eventually prove useful. At that moment, his thoughts drifted back to when Park Minju's level had previously risen. The status window had indicated that the experience gained by the believer Park Minju had increased, and as a result, the cult leader's level had also gone up. It had also announced that a new skill had been acquired. Feeling a surge of excitement, Changjae had reacted enthusiastically to the news of gaining a new skill. The status window displayed details about the skill. It enabled the user to hide themselves and one believer, making them invisible to others and completely undetectable by any camera or CCTV for 30 minutes. He had considered the terms and conditions shown in the window. Although they were somewhat strict, they still seemed acceptable. The window had further clarified that the skill could only be used on believers at level 3 or above and that the person activating the ability must be a believer. Moreover, it was restricted to once per year for each believer. The skill would be immediately nullified if used for scamming or committing a crime. Despite these limitations, Changjae had found the rules to be reasonable. After understanding the effect, he had reassured Minju that there was no need to worry and that getting caught was virtually impossible since they were essentially invisible now. Park Minju, however, had appeared visibly shocked during their ongoing workout session. She had struggled to believe that people truly couldn't see them. In her panicked thoughts, she assumed that others were merely avoiding them because they must have looked insane. She had dramatically lamented that her life was now ruined and that every time she boarded a subway from now on, people would request her to perform a workout. She believed she had officially earned the nickname Subway Girl. Changjae had found her reaction endearing yet borderline irrational. He had told her that if she didn't believe him, she was free to do whatever she wanted. Meanwhile, Minju's thoughts had spiraled into embarrassment. She had imagined the crowd staring at her with judgmental expressions, viewing her as if she were some sort of misbehaving girl. As the session concluded, Changjae had complimented her on doing a good job and suggested they finish the day. Minju had responded nervously, mentioning that the subway doors were about to open and that it felt strange, especially with people standing close to them. Changjae had teased her by saying she had fallen far, to which she had pleaded with him not to make so much fun of her. Elsewhere, her boyfriend, Byung-jun, had been frantically searching the station. With worry gripping his chest, he had questioned where she could have possibly gone. She wasn't answering his calls, and despite him ringing her repeatedly, there had been no reply. Relying on the couple tracking app, he had noted that she was somewhere nearby. His panic had shifted to confusion when he spotted Park Minju walking alongside a man, Lee Changjae. Calling out to her had yielded no response. Watching them, he had listened carefully as he followed from behind. Changjae had noticed Minju's ringing phone and had casually asked her if she wasn't going to answer. She had shrugged it off, stating that it didn't matter whether she answered or not. Her boyfriend, still trailing behind, had overheard the entire exchange and continued observing. Changjae had told her once again that he had already advised her to return home or go back to her boyfriend. But Minju had replied with a firm tone, declaring that Changjae was the only one who mattered to her now. She had even suggested that they go to a motel together and offered to pay. Byung-jun, observing everything from the background, had been left stunned. He couldn't comprehend why she was acting so shy and flustered in front of this man. Later that evening, Changjae had returned home and stood on the terrace, smoking silently. Gazing out over the city, he had murmured to himself that Park Minju's training was now complete. The status window had then appeared again, this time displaying a cryptic message. "I enjoyed watching that." Changjae had brushed off the message with indifference, stating that he didn't care. Around the same time, he had received a message from a man named Guwon, affiliated with the gangster Choi Gyu-tak. The message had instructed him to go to the hospital for a checkup. Guwon had assured him that he had already talked to the hospital staff and there was no need for him to put on an act. He had also requested that Changjae send a photo of his damaged scooter, demanding a response and calling him teammate. Changjae had replied briefly that he would go, though his mind was still running. He had considered how committed the old man must be to tracking down the culprit behind the hit and run. Collecting all this evidence, he had found it all quite fascinating. He had also wondered how much money they were aiming to claim from this situation. Meanwhile, inside the Emmanuel Church, a large congregation had gathered. Worshippers had been chanting, "I don't need anything, I only worship the Lord. I am only here because of His grace." On the stage, a man had addressed the crowd, asking them to warmly welcome their new associate pastor. As the crowd clapped, the new associate pastor stepped forward and introduced himself. He had greeted everyone warmly and said he was touched by the reception. He had added that there was someone special with whom he wished to share that moment. Lee Changjae had also been present at the church during the event. The status window had once again prompted him with a question that "What are you going to do now?" To that, Changjae had simply responded that such a question didn't even need to be asked. On the stage, the associate pastor, Lee Man-hong, had continued his address. He had announced that his wife was present and that he wanted to introduce her to the congregation. As she stepped forward, Changji's gaze had fixed on her. A thought crossed his mind: he needed to schedule a yoga session with her. The gangster leader, often referred to as Hyungnim, was in the middle of a yoga session with a young woman. During the session, she curiously brought up the subject of the hit-and-run case, asking him if it was true that he had plans to extort a large sum of money from the girl involved. She pointed out that he seemed to be using his teammate for that very purpose, but added that she was fairly certain money wasn't all he was after. Hyungnim grew irritated by her insinuations and firmly told her to be quiet. She, unfazed, reminded him that he had once promised to let her in on his trade secrets and mentioned that she was even paying tuition fees to learn. His annoyance visibly grew and he barked again for her to shut up, especially during the yoga session. Realizing she had crossed a line, the woman quickly apologized and quieted down. Outside the room, Guwon was casually sitting and eating noodles. Hyungnim emerged shortly after, wiping sweat from his forehead, and ordered him to call that boy and tell him to show up the next day. He instructed the same regarding the girl involved in the hit-and-run case. According to him, it was finally time for them to make their move. Meanwhile, Changjae was checking his phone, looking over a location marked on the map. He thought to himself that they wanted him to come to this place tomorrow. It had to be their office. The status window appeared again, this time displaying the message, so it finally begins. But where do you plan on using all of these, as it referred to the hammer, screwdriver, saw, and other tools Changjae had prepared. Reflecting deeply, Changjae thought about how everyone had their own goals. In his case, it was to live a life free from being burdened by others. He remembered how, while growing up, he had always been forced to endure things for the sake of others. Whether someone cursed him, used him, or looked down on him, he had tolerated it. His own parents, people he was supposed to rely on, hadn't even had the money to pull him out of trouble. Because of that, he had become a pushover, someone everyone could manipulate. He recalled that he had already died once before. From now on, he promised himself he wouldn't be anyone's disposable pawn. Back at the garage, Hyungnim walked toward his old car, muttering in frustration about how the door wouldn't open. He swore that once everything was over, the first thing he'd do was replace the broken vehicle. It was at that moment that Changjae arrived. He approached Hyungnim and greeted him respectfully by calling him Mr. Guwon. Without a warning, he delivered a powerful punch to his face, knocking him to the ground. Changjae then remarked coldly that since he had been summoned, he had come as a teammate. Lying on the floor, Hyungnim stared up in pain and demanded to know why he had done that. Changjae responded that it would have been better if Hyungnim had remained unconscious. Struggling to his feet, Hyungnim spoke of betrayal, saying that he had trusted Changjae and that this was how he was repaid. He declared that it was fine, they could settle it with a proper fight, and added that he hoped Changjae had boxed before. Both men squared off inside the garage and began brawling. The fight escalated and soon Hyungnim was bloodied and exhausted. Desperate, he raised his hands and tried to de-escalate the situation, suggesting that they talk it out. But Changjae dismissed the idea, claiming that it was far too late for words. The matter had to be carried through to the end. Hyungnim, trying to catch his breath, asked how much Changjae weighed. In response, Changjae unveiled a suitcase and coolly declared that all of them needed to fit inside it. Hyungnim, wide-eyed, asked what he planned to do with it. Changjae explained that since Hyungnim had turned against their old man, he had no choice, he needed certainty. The suitcase was his method. The status window appeared once again and commented that prison was no place for a cult leader. Changjae, brushing it off, told it to shut up and added that he didn't plan on going there either. The window then advised him to use whatever skills he had to set things right. Changjae, half laughing, asked, set right for what? He knew that the more people who discovered his powers, the worse it would be for him. He told the window not to judge him, his life was already a mess. The floor of the garage was now stained with Hyungnim's blood. Changjae, voice tense, muttered that he had to do whatever it took to get the money. Hyungnim, terrified, tried to de-escalate further, insisting that he wasn't a gangster, but rather a law-abiding citizen. Changjae wasn't convinced and demanded to know about Hyungnim's underlings. Hyungnim corrected him, saying that those weren't underlings, they were employees. They even received benefits and overtime pay. But Changjae, unimpressed, dismissed the explanation and made it clear he didn't care. Finally, Hyungnim realized what this was all about. He pointed out that this was related to the person who had hit Changjae in the accident, and Changjae confirmed it. With gritted teeth, he told the old man that he had finally understood. He then demanded to know the location of the person who had run him over. Hyungnim hesitated, prompting Changjae to place the saw against his neck. With a deadly tone, Changjae warned him not to act tough again or he'd lose his head. He ordered him to answer properly and give him the exact location. Under immense pressure, Hyungnim confessed that the girl in question was at Seoul Emmanuel Church. He added that she'd be easy to find because of how beautiful she was. At the same time, outside the church, Pastor Lee Manhong turned to his wife and asked her to accompany him to meet someone. She agreed and asked who it was. He explained that it was a newcomer who had made a large offering and expressed a desire to become a pastor himself. According to Manhong, the man had been deeply moved by his sermon. His wife asked if he liked the man, to which the pastor replied that he did, and that was exactly why he wanted to introduce her. The two of them walked into a room in the church where a man sat waiting. Pastor Lee apologized for making him wait so long. The man turned toward them. It was Lee Changjae. Changjae replied that there was no need to apologize. He looked at the pastor's wife Kim Esther and, with a strangely intense tone, said that he had been looking forward to this moment for a very long time. Changjae spoke to her with a calm tone, expressing that he was deeply impressed by her and genuinely proud. Pastor Lee Manhong served tea to both of them with a smile, commenting on how rare it was for a young person to show interest in becoming a pastor. He asked if something had happened in Changjae's life that led him to pursue such a path, assuring him that he could speak freely. Changjae responded that, for many, the motivation might be a divine vision or a dream where God appeared to them, some grand and spiritual revelation. But in his view, the simpler the reason, the better. Deep down, though, he admitted to himself that he didn't know anything about such matters at all. Kim Esther, who had been quietly sipping her tea, thanked her husband with a warm smile. Changjae looked at her intently, thinking that all the effort he had invested was worth it. Her face and body to him were more than satisfactory. What amused him was that the woman didn't even recognize who he was. It seemed she had completely forgotten about him. He silently decided that if she had forgotten him, then he would simply make her remember by turning her into a believer. As the conversation continued, he began elaborating on his reason for becoming a pastor. He told her husband that it had started after witnessing something shocking which had prompted him to reevaluate the direction of his life. Manhong asked him gently what exactly he had seen. Changjae said that it had begun with a car accident, a hit and run, to be specific. He added subtle pressure to his tone as he described it. He told them that he had witnessed the entire incident from the moment of impact to the driver speeding away without stopping. Manhong acknowledged that it must have been incredibly traumatic for him. But Changjae replied that the person it would have affected the most wasn't him, it was the one who had been hit. Manhong then asked whether the person who caused the accident had been caught. As the conversation progressed, Kim Esther's expression began to change, growing colder and more tense with each passing minute. Changjae told the pastor that the culprit hadn't been apprehended yet, but they would be soon. Trying to change the direction, Kim Esther interrupted, reminding her husband that he needed to prepare for the 2 p.m. service. He acknowledged it, realizing he had almost forgotten. As he stood up, he invited Changjae to accompany him, and Changjae agreed, addressing him as pastor with practiced politeness. The two of them went up to the stage together and began preparing for the service. Meanwhile, Kim Esther pulled Changjae aside and asked if he was from the PI agency. She questioned whether he was an employee or someone affiliated in that capacity. She accused him of working with them and said she had known something like this would happen. She expressed frustration that, instead of finding the person she had asked him to locate, he had turned up with a hidden motive. She questioned whether the boss even knew what he was doing and whether he truly believed that coming alone to confront her would achieve anything. Just then, one of Manhong's colleagues approached and reminded him it was time to eat. Meanwhile, Kim Esther continued confronting Changjae. She asked him if he thought threatening her alone would get him what he wanted. She pulled out her phone and attempted to call someone. Changjae calmly told her that it would be useless to try. The man she was calling wouldn't pick up, he was in poor health at the moment. She stared at him, silent. He then asked if she knew how one could avoid committing a hit and run. Before she could respond, he answered his own question by being aware of their surroundings. When she asked him why he had mentioned her surroundings, he told her that staying alert was how one could avoid hitting someone with their car in the first place. On stage, Pastor Man-ong began addressing the congregation. He opened the Bible and read the verse of the day, John 8 verse 4. He asked the congregation to reflect on the scripture. Back with Changjae, Kim Esther asked him with growing tension what he truly wanted from her. He told her that there was a lot he wanted, but first, she needed to remain still. At that moment, the status window appeared in front of him, indicating that the cult leader command had been activated. Panic washed over Kim Esther's face. She trembled and asked if he had gone insane. Suddenly, she found herself unable to speak. Confusion set in, she couldn't understand why her voice had failed her or why her body had gone weak. She mentally questioned what on earth was happening to her. Changjae leaned in and began speaking. He reminded her that on her first day at the PI agency, everyone had been under the impression that she was a remarkably strong-willed woman. But when the security footage was later reviewed, it revealed something very different. Before she entered the building, she had been trembling outside, hesitant to step through the doors. He gently told her that she didn't need to force herself to appear strong. She could leave everything to him. He proposed they do yoga right there in the church. She protested, whispering that it didn't make any sense and that they would definitely get caught. They were, after all, in a public place. But Manhong continued his sermon undisturbed, explaining the verse and inviting the congregation to reflect upon it. She tried to reason with Changjae again, stating that they were far too noticeable and that the pastor was staring at them. He advised her to lean closer and pretend to point something out to him if she didn't want anyone to notice what was really going on during the service. He handed her a book and told her to read from it. Conflicted, she questioned her own actions. She asked herself why she was doing everything he told her to. Meanwhile, Pastor Manhong apologized to the congregation and invited everyone to stand for the closing prayer. Chang-jae, observing Kim Esther closely, wondered if she might be unwell. She, on the other hand, was consumed by shame, thinking how absurd it was to do yoga during a church service, especially one led by her own husband. She whispered to herself that what they had just done, conducting a yoga session inside the church with her husband and the entire congregation present, was completely unacceptable. After the session ended, Chang-jae approached her with a calm demeanor and reminded her that she had once asked the PI agency to find the person she had hit with her car. He told her that the victim was him. That day, he had been the one who got hit. He then looked her in the eyes and said that there was something he had to know. Why on that day had she chosen to run away? And with that he warned her if she refused to answer, it wouldn't end there. Kim Esther, her face pale and her voice trembling, insisted that she couldn't speak about the incident, that there were reasons behind her decision to flee after the accident, reasons she could not disclose. As she struggled with her words, a notification appeared before Chang-jae, presented by the status window, calmly stating that Kim Esther had refused his command. The message puzzled him for a moment, but the window quickly clarified. Kim Esther's refusal stemmed from the presence of someone she considered her fate, someone whose safety could be jeopardized if she complied with the order. A higher cult leader level would be required to override such a restriction. Chang-jae took a quiet moment to reflect. If she was protecting someone tied to her sense of fate, it likely meant her husband. Perhaps she feared that if her secret surfaced, he would suffer the fallout. If it was Pastor Manhong she feared harming, it would explain her defiance. But regardless of who she was protecting, Chang-jae found himself unmoved by her motivations. He saw no reason to let her off the hook. To him, the cost of shielding her secret was too high. As Esther pleaded with him to stop, her composure shattered. He observed her with growing detachment. He rationalized to himself that all he needed was to convert her, to make her submit, believe, and obey. Yet as the tension grew, he couldn't help but feel a growing sense of discomfort. There was a part of him that questioned whether the cost of this effort was beginning to outweigh the gain. With quiet resolve, he picked up a resistance band and began a light workout session right there, in the space that had once felt sacred. Esther, alarmed and confused, questioned his intentions. But Chang-jae didn't waver. He calmly explained that since she had refused to speak and wanted her sins buried, they needed to strike a deal. If she complied now, he would walk away for the day. But if she refused again, he promised to bring both of them to the police, himself for coercion and her for the hit and run. He reminded her that the exposure of her actions would do irreparable damage, not just to her, but to her husband's reputation. If she became publicly associated with criminal behavior, it would destroy the man's pastoral career. Furthermore, he pointed out that she had used a private investigation firm to cover up the truth, an act that bordered on criminal coercion. Her expression shifted as fear crept deeper into her eyes. Her thoughts raced. He had painted a future for her that was filled with disgrace, legal trouble, and ruin for those closest to her. She couldn't respond. Her silence was telling. Chang-jae pressed further, urging her to act quickly before others arrived. He knew how deeply religious people feared exposure. They were willing to endure anything, he thought, just to keep up appearances. Esther, feeling the pressure mount, recognized how trapped she was. The humiliation, though unbearable, was preferable to public scandal. She saw no other option. Internally, she resigned herself to the fact that her pride, dignity, and name were slipping away. There was no telling how far he would go if she resisted again. He, meanwhile, struggled with his own emotions. He didn't want to feel satisfaction from any of this, and yet a part of him did. It made him uneasy. As Esther's restraint finally broke, her frustration and shame poured out in a burst of anger. She demanded to know what he planned to do with her. Chang-jae, steady and unaffected, explained that it stirred something in him to see a woman of elegance and grace being stripped down to his level, dragged from her dignified life into a space of degradation that mirrored his own past. He admitted, silently, that her fall from refinement to disgrace was, to him, simultaneously agonizing and intoxicating. With grim resolve, he extended the session, drawing her further into the compromise he had forced upon her. After the workout concluded, she collapsed, disoriented and weak. He noticed her sluggish movements and asked if she had passed out. She muttered that her head hurt, the room was spinning, and her eyes felt heavy. Her body no longer responded. She sank into unconsciousness. Later that night, she awoke to find herself lying in bed. The world around her was soft and quiet. Beside her sat her husband, Pastor Lee Manhong, his eyes filled with concern. He gently asked if she was awake, his voice tender and calm. She blinked slowly and, still disoriented, asked how she had returned home. He reassured her that everything was fine and told her not to worry. According to those who had found her, she had collapsed shortly after his sermon. Though the doctor had assured him there was nothing wrong physically, he had spent the night consumed with worry. His imagination had conjured all sorts of frightening scenarios, and now that she was awake, he was overwhelmed with relief. He offered her a glass of water, urging her to take care of herself. As she accepted the glass, a wave of guilt washed over her. She gazed at him silently, thinking that he still had no idea, no knowledge of what she had done. The lie, the shame, the betrayal, all hidden beneath the quiet of that home. Her fingers trembled and the glass slipped from her hand, shattering on the floor. She burst into tears, unable to contain the guilt any longer, and threw her arms around him, sobbing uncontrollably. Through her tears, she told him how sorry she was. He held her tightly and asked again if something was troubling her, if she was hiding something. She shook her head, whispering that it was nothing, only that she was grateful for him and deeply sorry for whatever pain she had caused. After some time spent comforting her, Manong reminded her gently that he had to leave for an important church event. She accompanied him outside, still shaken but trying to compose herself. As he stepped into the car, he turned to her once more, asking if she would be all right in his absence. She nodded, forcing a soft smile, and assured him that if anything came up, she would call her younger sister for support. He kissed her forehead and told her to rest. Then he drove off into the distance. Unseen by either of them, Changjae stood in the shadows just across the street. His eyes scanned the peaceful home. He noted how serene and well-kept it was. He quietly admitted to himself that it was a nice house, too nice for what he had planned next. He stepped forward toward the door and rang the bell. Inside, Esther was unaware of his presence. She stood beneath the shower, the warm water cascading over her body, trying to wash away the guilt that clung to her skin like a second layer. She thought she had at least a moment of peace before the next storm. Outside, Changjae waited silently at the doorstep, eyes locked on the front door, unmoving. His thoughts were sharp, his resolve colder than ever. The time had come. The real mission was about to begin. From inside the house, Esther's voice called out cautiously, asking who was at the door. Changjae, standing outside with a composed posture, responded that he was delivering a package. Upon hearing that, she sounded confused and asked him to leave it at the front door. He then remarked that the package seemed to contain food and was rather large, possibly something like kimchi. She replied with slight hesitation, saying there wasn't anyone who would send her such a thing. Still unwilling to go outside, she repeated her request, telling him to just leave the package at the door as she couldn't come out at the moment. Curious and uncertain, she tried to view the front area through the intercom screen, only to realize the monitor wasn't showing anything. She furrowed her brows, quietly wondering if the screen was broken. Then, out of nowhere, Changji's voice grew firmer. He demanded that she open the door and come out as she was. At the same time, the status window appeared before him, confirming that the cult leader command had successfully been activated on Kim Esther. Almost in a trance, she opened the door. Her eyes widened in alarm as she saw him, and her voice trembled as she asked what he was doing there. Without waiting for a proper invitation, he stepped inside and casually offered a mock prayer aloud, asking for God's forgiveness on Esther's behalf for resisting his messenger and refusing to open the door when she was supposedly about to face judgment. Panicked, she asked how he knew where she lived and demanded that he leave immediately. He, however, responded with an eerie calmness, saying that with faith, nothing was impossible. He reminded her that the Bible itself said so and claimed that his belief in her husband, Pastor Manhong, had led him down this path. As he spoke, Esther's mind drifted into a flashback. She remembered vividly how, at the church, many women had been drawn to this man. They praised his piety, his devotion, and even his good looks. They had been so taken by him that they revealed everything, names, ages, addresses, phone numbers, and even their daily routines, simply out of trust and admiration. And in that same breath of trust, they had shared information about her too. He recalled how they described Esther as a woman from a respectable but distant family, childless, a housewife with no real place among the church's inner social circle. Kind, but ultimately an outsider. Esther, fighting to maintain her composure, reminded him of what he had said at the church, that things were over between them, that everything had ended. But he quickly dismissed her memory, telling her he never meant it was truly over, only that something new was just beginning. Realization struck her then, bitter and cold. She thought to herself that he had only manipulated her and would do so again. In a burst of fury, she slapped him and ordered him to get out of her house. She screamed at him to leave immediately, her chest heaving and her face flushed with emotion. Her legs weakened, and for a brief moment it looked as though she might collapse. He remained unmoved. Watching her fall into a state of hysteria, he pondered silently whether she had always possessed such a temper. Perhaps, back at the church, she had only remained composed because of the setting and because her husband had been there. He considered using the cult leader command again but stopped himself. True submission, he reasoned, would not be real if it was forced every time. He asked her if she had calmed down. And then, without giving her time to answer, he coldly suggested that if she had the courage, she should just go and confess everything to her husband. As he said this, he took out his phone and began dialing, planning to strike at her deepest vulnerability again. Desperation flooded her voice as she pleaded with him not to make the call. He looked at her with a mix of disdain and amusement, wondering aloud what exactly she thought he couldn't do. With tears brimming in her eyes, she told him she would do anything, just anything, if he would stop. He observed her quietly, noting how much she must truly adore her husband to be reduced to begging. He told her that before the call connected, he had to say something he had felt since they last met at the church. In his view, she was a complete failure as a pastor's wife. He then demanded they begin a resistance band session together. At first, she barked back at him in anger, telling him to shut up. But in the same breath, she succumbed, telling him to hurry and get it over with. Her pride was collapsing under the weight of pressure. He obliged with a mocking tone, telling her that they must make this workout count. He reminded her that if she wanted him gone before her husband returned, she needed to perform well. He emphasized that this was her chance, a choice, even, and hinted that one day she might even thank him for it. Eventually, in broken whispers, she expressed reluctant gratitude. She asked him not to reveal anything to her husband and thanked him for giving her the opportunity to hide the truth. He responded that her attitude would serve her well. He urged her to begin, observing her trembling hands as she obeyed. As the session went on, he acknowledged to himself that he was suffering in that moment, but not in the way he had expected. Deep down, a strange sensation stirred within him. He was supposed to feel nothing but control and power. Instead, he felt a confusing pull, something bordering on pleasure and pain, guilt and dominance, all tangled in a storm he no longer fully understood. Esther was silently grappling with the conflicting emotions inside her. She kept telling herself that she despised the situation she was in, that this wasn't something she should be enjoying. The only reason she was doing it was because she had no other choice. It wasn't desire, it was resignation. After the workout session, Changjae casually remarked that she had performed far better than he had expected. He commented on how she must be quite passionate, an observation that only fueled her anger. With a sudden burst of fury, she snapped at him, warning him never to speak of her husband again and to keep his mouth shut. She demanded that he hurry up and finish the session, declaring that she now needed to teach him some manners. In response, Changjae reminded her of the pain he had felt when she had hit him with her car. He pointed out with noticeable bitterness that she had never once apologized for it. He told her that, frankly, he didn't expect much from someone he considered so shameless. According to him, the least she could do now was make up for it through this workout session. Esther responded with resignation, telling him to go ahead and do as he pleased. If training her helped him release his frustration, then she was willing to let him do it. Changjae grinned, saying that was exactly what he wanted to hear, though he never implied he would stop after this. Deep down, Esther couldn't suppress the anxious thoughts flooding her mind. She wondered what the people from church would say if they ever found out about her. She was sure their judgment would be harsh and their words would cut deep. Changjae, sensing her hesitation, warned her not to hold back again. He admitted that it irritated him when she did and told her that if she didn't want others to find out, she had better comply without resistance. At that moment, the status window displayed a notification: cult leader command activated on Kim Esther. By the time the workout was over, Esther felt as if her consciousness was beginning to splinter. Her thoughts were no longer clear, and fatigue wasn't the only thing affecting her state of mind. During the session, Changjae kept reflecting on how unusually long it was taking for her to become a proper believer. Something about her was different. He wondered if it had anything to do with her being a married woman. She was proving far more difficult to train than others he had encountered. As she moved to leave, he called out to her, questioning where she was going and noting once again how complicated she was turning out to be. Changjae proposed the idea of continuing their yoga session right in front of Esther's wedding portrait. She hesitated, clearly uncomfortable, and softly protested, saying it wasn't appropriate to do it there. But he dismissed her concerns, stating that she needed to pay the price for having run away in the first place. He added almost playfully that he had only been half-joking earlier, though the edge in his tone suggested otherwise. He began to press her for honesty, telling her she had only 3 seconds to confess the truth. Under pressure, Esther finally admitted that he was right, she had come there on purpose. She lowered her head and offered an apology, though deep down she felt that apologizing to someone like him was utterly degrading. Changjae accepted her confession with satisfaction, claiming that being honest was a good thing. According to him, honesty even came with rewards. But internally he was still frustrated. Despite her submission, he could sense that she had not yet become one of his true believers. The status window confirmed his thoughts. It indicated that Esther already had something, perhaps someone, she believed in and followed. This pre-existing faith made her less susceptible to converting, but the flip side was that turning someone like her would yield greater experience. The more her mind was shattered, the higher the chance she would ultimately submit. The message concluded by encouraging him. He was doing well, and she was almost there. Changjae reflected on the words in the status window, annoyed at the vague reference to whoever or whatever she believed in. But he quickly brushed it aside, reminding himself that all he needed to do was break her mentally. That was the only goal. He turned to her and asked whether she would be a good girl from now on. Without waiting for her consent, he informed her that he would now be allowed to do yoga sessions with her anytime he wished. He demanded a clear answer, stating he would ask her once more. Then he gestured toward the wedding portrait and told her to look at her husband's photo before answering him. Esther, staring at the image of her husband, was filled with self-loathing. The very idea of making such a humiliating promise in front of that photo made her stomach churn. She silently cursed the situation, wishing she didn't have to do this. Changjae noticed her internal struggle and questioned her again, asking if she was truly embarrassed about making such a promise. He pushed further, asking if she thought that feeling would go away once her husband returned home. He casually added that he had plenty of time to wait. As all this pressure bore down on her, Esther could only think about how terrifying it was. What kind of man could push her to this point? Eventually, she gave in. The status window responded immediately. Esther's mind has started to break. She is feeling powerless. She has become a believer. Believer level 1. Changjae was thrilled. His face lit up with satisfaction. He had finally succeeded in converting her. The status screen further informed him that he had received 20 points. It also stated that the effect was stronger now and the number of daily uses had doubled. His command power had leveled up. He began to think about how far he had come. Now that he had upgraded his leadership ability, he could demand even more from her. Still, something continued to nag at him. The more he thought about it, the more bizarre it all seemed. What kind of rich woman drives alone on a rainy day? And why was she still so desperate to cover it up? The entire situation reeked of something suspicious. Just as he was about to question her further, her phone suddenly began to ring. It was a call from her husband, Manhong. Manhong greeted Changjae warmly, saying he had seen a missed call earlier but hadn't been able to pick up because of an ongoing event. Changjae replied that he had stopped by their home to see him, but since he wasn't there, he had simply exchanged a few words with his wife before leaving. Manhong mentioned that he would be coming home soon and invited Changjae to return. But Changjae, feigning casualness, asked if the event wasn't supposed to last until the next day. Manhong explained that the rest of the event had been cancelled due to heavy rain and again suggested that Changjae come over. Changjae politely declined, saying that he would visit another time. Once he ended the call, he turned to Esther with a wry smile and remarked that she was a lucky woman. He had so many things he still wanted to ask her. He added that he might as well leave his mark anyway and proceeded to draw his signature on her hand. He then demanded that from now on she would have to call him honey. She hesitated, but he quickly warned her that if she hesitated again, he wouldn't be going home that night. Finally, she gave in, agreeing that from now on she would be his yoga partner. Changjae had returned to the very location where the accident had occurred. As he stood on the familiar spot, the status window appeared once again, informing him that he had arrived at the place where the incident had taken place. He looked around and muttered to himself that this was where it all began, where Esther had hit him with her car and everything started spiraling. The status window then posed a thought-provoking question, wondering whether Esther might be hiding something deeper. Changjae dismissed the notion without much interest. In truth, he didn't particularly care if she was concealing something. He believed that he had already given her enough reason to come back to him. Pressing her for answers now would only increase the pressure on her, and that, in turn, might provoke her into doing something drastic. He reassured himself that there was no rush. Time was on his side. He decided to proceed gradually, keeping his pace measured. Inwardly, he noted that there was still one thing bothering him, something he had to uncover. He began to reflect on the status window's earlier message, the one that had explained how Esther had already placed her faith in something or perhaps someone. That was why converting her had taken longer than usual, and it also explained why the reward for doing so had been significantly greater. He turned to the status window again, seeking confirmation, and received a clear affirmation. Curious about the potential for faster advancement, he asked whether clergy members could be converted more easily. He wondered aloud if converting someone who followed God instead of man would grant him greater progress and allow him more intense and frequent sessions with women. The status window responded in a supportive tone, stating that it was indeed an excellent choice. Inside the quiet church, a voice resonated through the cathedral during prayer. The congregation echoed the words, "Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Let us not into temptation. Gracious Mother Mary, Amen." Among them, a delicate young nun named Sister Erin knelt in solemn devotion, silently praying for wisdom and guidance from God. Shortly after, a fellow church member approached her, informing her that the group had already decided who would be volunteering at the hospital that day. He asked who would remain behind to look after the cathedral. Turning to Erin, he suggested that she could stay. Erin responded calmly, agreeing to stay behind, though she asked if there was a specific reason he had approached her. The man admitted that he had left her out of the hospital rotation because he was worried she might faint again, just like last time. Erin nodded in understanding, and the others soon gathered around her, bidding her farewell and urging her to take care of herself. Once alone, she sat in silence, burdened by thoughts about her own inadequacy. She believed herself to be a shy and frail nun who wasn't even capable of fulfilling proper mission work. The only thing she could contribute was simple, menial labor. Yet now she found herself constantly tested by a man named Changjae. Nearby, she noticed a religious passage written on a piece of scripture: "Even a sinner can become a faithful clergy member if they truly repent." She paused for a moment, wondering if the message had been meant for her. Before long, Changjae appeared before her again. Greeting her politely, he asked if she had time to talk. Erin instantly recognized him as the man who kept coming to church, always claiming to be interested in religion. She had seen him enough times to know he didn't come just to pray. Changjae began his usual line of questioning. He asked her whether she had committed any sins. She responded that she had, though her tone was cautious. He then asked her what kind of sins. Erin suspected his intentions. He often questioned her about church doctrine, slowly disarming her sense of caution. Still, she gave him an honest reply. She admitted that she had quarreled with someone during school and had once lied to her mother. Deep inside, she found his persistent interest unsettling. She went on, mentioning that she had once even considered trying a cigarette. Though she considered that more of a childish mistake, she was unsure how to interpret his reactions. He seemed frivolous most of the time, yet at moments like this, he took things seriously, almost eerily so. He pointed out that some dust had settled on her during her cleaning earlier. Embarrassed by the observation, she felt her face grow warm. The more she encountered him, the more flustered she became. Her emotions were increasingly difficult to control. And if it wasn't him, then it was another woman who would appear soon. That woman, Minyoung, entered the church again, this time hidden beneath an abaya to shield her identity from others. She approached the altar, knelt quietly, and began to pray. Her voice trembled as she pleaded with God, confessing that she couldn't forget the man's touch. She said it hurt too much, this inability to let go, and asked God either to let her meet him again or to kill him so she could be free. She vowed she would do anything. In the silence that followed, a familiar voice came from behind her. It was Changjae, who calmly stated that he had heard her prayer and that he would grant her wish. Minyoung panicked, her body frozen with anxiety. Changjae looked at her and reminded her of her own words. She had said she would do anything. Changjae and Minyoung had gone out together for lunch at a nearby restaurant. He suggested, while scanning the menu, that things might go more smoothly if they ate while talking. As the food arrived, he encouraged her to eat more, gesturing toward the spread. Minyoung, with a teasing tone, questioned his intentions. She asked whether he was trying to build up her stamina by feeding her so much meat, perhaps to prepare her for more intense workout sessions. She then glanced out the window and noted the number of motels nearby. With a hint of sarcasm, she accused him of planning something, suggesting that this was exactly the sort of thing he wanted, to conduct their so-called workout session in one of those places. She added that it must be a habit of his and asked him to drop the act and speak the way he usually did. Changjae agreed, nodding calmly, though his thoughts were elsewhere. He noticed that she seemed more relaxed and cheeky compared to their first meeting. However, something about her demeanor felt slightly off, and he couldn't put his finger on what it was. The status window appeared before him, confirming that Song Minyoung was indeed one of his believers. It noted that she still couldn't forget the sensation of their previous workout and that she would need to be satisfied with another session. Changjae smirked to himself, thinking that this particular quest would be easy. He casually remarked that he hadn't expected things to unfold this way. He wasn't usually someone who simply followed others around. Still, some memories from earlier lingered in his mind, and he began entertaining the idea of teasing her a bit more before getting down to business. Minyoung looked at him with suspicion and pointed out that he had been the one to claim she couldn't forget the feeling of their previous training. She questioned why he was now implying that she had wanted it. Changjae replied smoothly that he understood and that, if she truly wanted it, he would gladly give her what she desired. He asked whether she needed his help. As he spoke, Minyoung silently wondered why she was already starting to feel a sense of anticipation. The status window displayed an update song. Minyoung's stamina was increasing. She questioned herself, wondering if she had been too direct. Meanwhile, Changjae leaned forward and told her that if she really wanted to begin their yoga session, all she needed to do was pick up the phone in front of her. She hesitated only briefly before picking it up, and he smiled, praising her, saying she was such a good girl. He then stood up and told her to get up as well. They were leaving now. Minyoung followed him, uncertain and anxious, wondering what lay ahead for her. The two of them went to a nearby motel where they began another workout session. Minyoung, despite her earlier confidence, found the situation increasingly irritating. She couldn't hide the frown that appeared on her face. Changjae caught the expression and asked her directly whether she had just frowned. He questioned if she disliked the session so much that perhaps he should just go home. She quickly clarified, explaining that her face naturally had cat-like features, so she always looked like that. Inwardly, she reflected that although he seemed to understand what she wanted, all he had done so far since bringing her here was tease her endlessly. Still, despite his strange behavior, there was something disarmingly attractive about him. She realized, perhaps for the first time, that he was more handsome than she had initially noticed. Maybe she needed to focus more on the training itself. After all, he was the man who was supposed to teach her how to exercise. She asked why they were doing this kind of training, prompting him to reply vaguely that it was simply time to move into something else. The status window then revealed that Song Minyoung's mental state was beginning to shake, and as a result, a multiplier on experience gain would now take effect. Changjae took note of the update and concluded that it would be beneficial to break her down a little more. He requested a massage, asking her to focus on the muscles around his neck and to apply more strength to it. Minyoung complied, though she thought to herself that her arms were beginning to ache. As the strain built up, Changjae issued a warning: if she didn't keep it up, he'd leave and go home. This left her internally conflicted. Despite being a popular and successful woman in other aspects of life, here she was, so emotionally attached to this man that she felt compelled to seek his approval even after the humiliation she'd endured at the restaurant. Overwhelmed by her emotions, she suddenly lashed out. She shouted at him, accusing him of thinking he was so skilled at yoga sessions that he could do whatever he pleased and that he could look down on people like her without consequence. She demanded that he teach her regular exercises instead. She admitted she didn't want to be so blunt, but she had to ask, why had they come to a motel in the first place? Changjae, clearly irritated, brought up the insults she had thrown at him before. He reminded her that she had once called him an orphan and now she was referring to him as a delivery boy. He said that it was clear her attitude needed correcting. Minyoung, watching his reaction, thought that at last he was taking her request seriously. Finally, he had agreed to teach her the exercises. But Changjae had a different thought altogether. He considered that she might be expecting him to give her what she wanted, but the reality was different. According to him, their relationship wasn't one of friendly warmth where they could do training together while smiling and laughing. He told her bluntly that she needed to hide that kind of personality. Her arrogant attitude wouldn't work on him, and it hurt his pride to even consider pretending otherwise. He added that he couldn't believe she had gone all the way to the cathedral to whine about it. After a short session of yoga training, he abruptly announced that he was done. Despite the physical part being over, he expressed his dissatisfaction, saying he still wasn't content with how the training had gone. It was all so frustrating and strange. He also reminded her that she had looked down on him earlier because he had once been a delivery boy. Just then, a knock came at the motel room door. A pizza delivery boy had arrived. Both Changjae and Minyoung went to the door to receive the order. As they stood there, Changjae silently noted how absurd the situation was. Despite having told her not to, Minyoung had followed him to the door without hesitation. He thought to himself that she was truly spoiled. Minyoung handed over a card to pay, trying to brush the moment off casually. Inwardly, though, she was mortified. She had been forced to come to the door dressed like this, and the embarrassment felt so overwhelming that she thought she might die from it. She quietly wondered what she was supposed to do now. The delivery boy stood frozen at the doorway, visibly confused and unsure of what he was witnessing. Changjae, grinning slightly, turned to him and said that he had something very interesting to show him. Changjae looked at the young man standing awkwardly at the motel room door, holding the pizza. With a curious expression, he asked the delivery boy how old he was. The delivery boy, a bit startled by the sudden question, responded that he was 22. Changjae tilted his head and repeated the answer with a questioning tone, asking what exactly just 22 was supposed to mean. The boy quickly apologized, admitting that he had been caught off guard by the question. He couldn't help but wonder silently what was going on here. It was all starting to feel surreal. Changjae nodded and then asked whether, since the boy was younger than him, he could speak to him casually. The delivery boy gave a polite smile and agreed, telling him it was fine to speak informally. Inside, the young man was overwhelmed by the situation. He had only ever read about bizarre encounters like this on internet forums. Yet now here he was, standing in the middle of one. He could barely believe it was really happening. Turning toward Minyoung, Changjae said that they should begin the workout session and told her to show the delivery boy just how perfect she really was. He encouraged her to start immediately, pointing out that the delivery boy was waiting. The status window suddenly appeared, notifying Changjae that the cult leader command had been activated. Minyoung, glancing toward the screen, felt her hesitation deepen. She didn't want to proceed with another workout, but the compulsion tugged at her. She knew she had to do it regardless of how she felt. Changjae turned to the delivery boy again and asked with a smirk whether he really wanted to watch the workout session. The delivery boy, now too intrigued to resist, admitted that yes, he did want to see it. Minyoung, feeling the weight of the situation, thought to herself that the boy was staring at her with such shameless boldness. It was as if he were observing her like a specimen, completely unfiltered. She couldn't understand what she was doing anymore. Her body had been unusually sensitive since earlier, and now exhaustion was setting in. She told herself this couldn't go on like this. Noticing her sluggish movements, Changjae criticized her delay, stepping forward and offering to help. Then he turned back to the delivery boy and asked whether he had ever seen such a strange woman before. The delivery boy shook his head and asked with a nervous laugh if she was Changji's girlfriend. Laughing, Changjae replied that she wasn't, he had only just met her by chance. He added, with clear amusement, that this was how she had ended up after just a single day. He remarked how bizarre it was that she was this obsessed with working out. Minyoung clenched her fists internally, thinking that he was mocking her, humiliating her in front of a stranger. She didn't want to enjoy the feelings rushing through her, but she found herself unable to resist them. The sensation was too strong. Changjae turned to the delivery boy again, nodding toward Minyoung, and said that she seemed to be really enjoying the workout. She, meanwhile, was drowning in shame, telling herself repeatedly how much she hated this humiliation. Yet he continued, saying that she looked completely ready. That broke something inside her. She suddenly shouted that enough was enough. She couldn't take any more of this disgrace. She demanded that Changjae send the delivery boy away so they could continue their business in private. Changjae, however, leaned back and asked the delivery boy whether he had enjoyed the little workout session performed by the woman. He then added that, interestingly enough, he had never actually said the boy could watch in the first place. Turning back to Minyoung, he accused her of being rude to him. She, startled by the shift in his tone, asked what he meant and what exactly he was planning to do now. He reminded her bluntly that she had been the one begging for the workout session. She tried to defend herself, saying that she hadn't agreed to do any of this in front of someone else. The status window appeared again, showing that Song Minyoung's piety level had increased. Changjae told her it was all right now, but she had to say something, an apology. Specifically, he insisted she apologize for looking down on a delivery driver. Minyoung resisted inwardly, wondering why she should be forced to say such a thing to someone she had never even met before. Yet despite her resentment, the situation demanded it. Reluctantly, she turned to the boy and said the words she was sorry for looking down on him. The delivery boy, caught completely off guard, blinked in confusion. He couldn't understand why this elegantly dressed woman was suddenly apologizing to him in such a formal manner. None of it made sense. Changjae, however, didn't let the moment pass without pushing it further. He told the delivery boy that, as a gesture of how sorry she was, maybe it would be appropriate to let him join in for some yoga. The suggestion sent a shock through Minyoung, who immediately turned to him, demanding to know what he was talking about and how he had decided something like that without her consent. The delivery boy, wide-eyed and barely able to contain his disbelief, asked tentatively if he really could join the session. He seemed unsure if it was some kind of joke. Changjae, maintaining a calm and authoritative tone, said that yoga alone wasn't enough. He explained that Minyoung still needed to learn a wider variety of techniques, and letting someone like the delivery boy join would be an excellent opportunity for that. After the delivery boy had been ushered out of the room, a heavy silence lingered in the air. Changjae, standing near the doorway, turned back to Minyoung with a sharp gaze. He asked her coldly whether she had nothing to say to him. In his view, she ought to be expressing gratitude. He added, with a tone laced in sarcasm, that if she had truly wanted to complete her workout session with the delivery boy instead, he could easily summon him back. Minyoung, already burning with humiliation and frustration, kept her voice level. She told him that she didn't care about anyone, whether it was him or the boy who had just left. To her, they were all the same. Changjae raised an eyebrow, noting to himself that her anger was real. But even so, she remained his believer. He considered, briefly, whether it might be necessary to console her a little. Perhaps she had earned at least that. Switching tones, he suggested they return to what really mattered, the workout. He asked her if she still wanted to continue or if she had lost her desire entirely. She didn't respond immediately, only locking her gaze on him. Her expression was unreadable, but there was a storm behind her eyes. Attempting to lighten the tension, he remarked that, upon reflection, he realized he didn't actually know much about her. He asked her what she did for a living, his tone now casual and probing. Min-young was caught off guard by the sudden shift. The man who had just degraded her was now trying to hold a polite conversation. She thought bitterly that there was no cure for falling for a person like him. Curious and a little suspicious, she asked him why he wanted to know that now. He brushed off her question and instead insisted she tell him her age and her occupation. As he watched her sit straighter, with a touch of pride returning to her posture, he realized that her confidence had begun to recover. That meant she had relaxed, just as he wanted. Now it was time for him to resume control. When she hesitated, he reminded her again to answer properly. Min-young finally replied that her name was Song Min-young, she was 29 years old and worked in the finance department of a corporate firm. Chang-jae waved off her answer, unimpressed. He said he hadn't asked for such basic biographical information. In response, Min-young, clearly irritated, said that she usually targeted men like him, those who stole money, who exposed others' secrets, and got people fired. She had a sharp tongue, and she knew how to use it. Surprisingly, Chang-jae smiled at her answer. That was the kind of response he had hoped for. He told her that if she continued to speak her mind like that, he'd be willing to do whatever she wanted. The status window blinked to life beside him, showing that Song Min-young's mental state was beginning to waver. She looked at him warily, demanding to know what he was up to. He responded that he was about to begin the yoga session again, unless, of course, she required another audience like before. The status window now displayed that an experience multiplier had been activated. Despite the turmoil in her thoughts, she found herself observing him more closely. Her thoughts drifted again. What if she could make him hers? The status window updated once more. Her limit for emotional fulfillment had been broken. The quest was marked complete, her believer level had risen, and as a hidden reward, a new skill had been unlocked. The believer management system was now fully operational. Chang-jae, now calm and composed, instructed her to get up and prepare to leave. He informed her that the motel staff would soon be coming in to clean the room. But Min-young, still clinging to the moment, pleaded with him not to go. She wanted more, one more session, one more connection. Something. He, however, turned away and told her no. He coldly asked her to get dressed and leave. Min-young stared at him as he walked toward the door. Her heart burned with new resolve. She was going to do it. She was going to make him hers. Whether it took time, effort, or humiliation, she was no longer confused. She had made up her mind. Just before stepping out, Chang-jae turned back and casually said, "See you next time." And with that, he disappeared down the hallway. Left alone in the room, Min-young sat still for a moment, her fingers brushing the sheets where he had sat. Meanwhile, Chang-jae opened his system window and addressed it directly. He reminded it that it had mentioned a new skill had been granted. The status window responded, explaining that he had acquired the ability to neutralize the effects of poisoned food using believer management points. He scoffed slightly, questioning when he would ever need such an ability. Why would he be eating poisoned food in the first place? The status window merely responded that it might prove useful sooner than he expected. He sighed, rubbing his forehead, and said they would proceed carefully. His ultimate goal was Sister Erin. She offered the most experience, and he knew she was the key to unlocking greater power. Yet no matter how much her faith shook, she had never let down her guard. His cult leader command might not be strong enough for someone like her. Given her deeply rooted religious devotion, her rejection of him would be severe. If he failed, the consequences could be far worse than with Min-young or Esther. He realized he needed a more effective skill, something stronger. He asked the system if any new quests had been unlocked that would offer new abilities. The system replied that because at least one believer had reached level 5, a new quest had become available. The reward was generous and aligned with his current strategy. Chang-jae grinned and said he already knew which believer to focus on for that quest. The system asked for confirmation. Who was he thinking of? Without hesitation, he replied, "Who else but believer number 1? He immediately picked up his phone and dialed the number. On the other end, Park Minju answered with a tired voice, asking what he wanted now. His reply was light and charming. He told her he had a plan in mind, something special. A proper date and an amazing dinner.